Hello there! When we last checked in on the Gatewatch, they were being thoroughly trounced by Bolos on the plain of Amonkhet. While each planeswalker managed to barely escape with their life, they didn't all end up in the same place. Jace Beleren inadvertently planeswalked to the tropical plane of Ixalan after having his mind imploded by Bolos, and was trapped there for some time. But we've seen his story already. Now it's time for us to look at what happened to the rest of the Gatewatch after their unfortunate scuffle during the Hour of Devastation. Liliana, Chandra, Nissa, and Gideon all planeswalked to Dominaria, the plane on which they had previously agreed to reconvene with the Johnny Goldmane, to further prepare for the fight against Bolos. By the way, over the last 2 episodes, we discussed the history of Dominaria and the backstory of Liliana, both of which are relevant to the story to come. I recommend watching those videos before this one, just to get a more complete picture of things. With that being said, however, on with the show! Real quick, I'd like to give a huge thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video. Click my link in the description or in the comments below to see what Magic the Gathering's got going on right now. So, the battered and bruised remnants of the Gatewatch landed in the Caligo region of Dominaria, in the middle of a rotting, fetid swamp. Clearly, things on Amonkhet hadn't gone swimmingly, so it was time to collect themselves and assess the damages. 1. Jace was missing. Not great. 2. Gideon had a massive hole in his torso. Also not great. 3. Nissa was angry as hell. Also not great. Nissa's fury was directed primarily at Liliana, whom she accused of using the Gatewatch to free herself from her demonic pact, rather than helping them take down Bolos. After all, while Liliana managed to destroy Razaketh with their help, it hadn't taken much to get her to give up and flee from the Elder Dragon. To make matters worse, as Gideon was trying to diffuse the tension amongst the group, it came out that Belzenlok, Liliana's final demon, was here on Dominaria, and of course she wanted the Gatewatch's help in slaying him. Not exactly refuting Nissa's point here. Liliana argued that if she hadn't been constrained by her pact on Amonkhet, she could have defeated Bolos no problem, but Nissa wasn't buying it. Gideon tried to reason with Nissa that Liliana was indeed their best chance at beating Bolos, but that didn't seem to matter to her anymore. Nissa had sworn an oath to keep watch for the life of every plane, but she couldn't stand to see another plane broken before her own was made whole. And so, Nissa's watch ended, and she planeswalked away, a member of the Gatewatch no longer. Unfortunately for Liliana and Gideon, Nissa's furious departure was immediately followed by Chandra bailing as well. Chandra was convinced that they had failed on Amonkhet because she wasn't strong enough, and that she needed to train and strengthen herself before she could do anything else. With a rush of fire, Chandra planeswalked away, leaving just Gideon and Liliana. While Liliana expected Gideon to follow suit and leave her all alone, he seemed steadfast in the notion that they needed Liliana to defeat Bolos, and for that to happen, she needed to kill Belzenlok. So, Gideon would stay on Dominaria to help Liliana hunt down her final demon. Before that had any chance of happening, however, something had to be done about Gideon's gaping chest wound. Fortunately, they were now in familiar territory for Liliana. She brought Gideon to Ves, the nearby town where her family home, the Ves Manor, once stood. There, she would find a safe place to treat Gideon's injury. Or so she thought. The thriving forest that once encompassed the area had been corrupted into decaying swampland, and the small town Liliana had grown up in was in a horrendous state of disrepair, seeming all but abandoned by its residents. The duo found their way to a still-inhabited inn, where Liliana was able to inquire about what had become of Ves. While it wasn't a surprise to hear that the history of her family had faded into obscurity and had come to be known as the Curse of Ves, Liliana was surprised to hear that the town's sorry state was due to the local presence of the Cabal, a shadowy cult-like organization on Dominaria. The Cabal had existed for some 500 years, but their influence had never been this far-reaching in the past. While the Cabal was originally an extortionist commercial group that ran profitable fighting pits on the continent of Ataria, it had been presumed defunct by the time the mending occurred. That changed, however, when the few remaining Cabal members performed a ritual to resurrect Kuber, a being the Cabal worshipped as a god. But the ritual failed, accidentally summoning Belzenlok instead. Belzenlok swiftly took control of the Cabal, moving their headquarters from Otaria to the Stronghold of Reborn, and transforming the organization from a money-hungry crime syndicate to what was effectively a death cult. The Demon Lord had been using the Cabal to amass power ever since. Anyway, the innkeeper didn't have the herbs that Liliana wanted to treat Gideon, so she ventured out into the Caligo morass, previously known as the Caligo forest, that surrounded what had been her home centuries prior. Even though she had never returned after her initial planeswalk away from Dominaria, here Liliana was again, picking the same herbs she had once used to treat her brother Josu. After obtaining what she needed, Liliana didn't return to Gideon. Instead, she found herself wandering back to the grounds on which the Vess Manor once stood. She expected to find nothing more than a pile of rubble, but to her astoundment, the house still remained. The Vess Manor was weathered and overgrown, but stood strong, marred only by the stench of blood and rotting flesh. Inside the mansion, Liliana discovered runes burned into the floor, pools of dried blood, dozens of unlit candles, evidence that some sort of sinister ritual had occurred here. Liliana swiftly returned to Vess, only to find it under attack by undead knights of the Cabal, led by a living cleric. Her arrival quickly turned the tide of battle, however, as she was able to turn and/or destroy the zombies with ease. Just as Liliana moved to destroy the last knight, a voice whispered in her mind, "The void awaits." Liliana thought this to be some sort of trick by the undead knight's master, the Cabal Lich who had devastated her homeland. She thought it likely, too, that this Lich was aware of her presence and was the one behind the unnatural preservation of her family's manor. All of a sudden, a face flashed before Liliana's eyes. A Lich's face. Josu Vess's face. Confronting the Cabal cleric confirmed what Liliana dreaded. Anticipating her arrival, Belzenlok had taken Josu, transforming him from a mindless zombie to a powerful undead lich dedicated to serving Belzenlok and the Cabal. The ritual site at the manor had been his. Cursing Belzenlok's name, Liliana vowed to free her brother from his control. The following morning, Liliana set out into the swamp around Vess once again, this time looking for an old friend, the Raven Man, the entity that had guided her in these lands so long ago. Liliana accused the Raven Man of making Josu what he was today and demanded he lay him to rest. Unsurprisingly, Liliana didn't get very far with that demand, and after a few cryptic responses, the Raven Man disappeared. With him gone, Liliana desperately racked her mind for a solution, a method of releasing Josu from his lichdom. She could use the Chain Veil, of course, but it would leave her much too drained to have a prayer of defeating Belzenlok, which is surely what he was hoping for. But as far as she could see, the Chain Veil was the only way. To release Josu and still have a chance at defeating her demon, Liliana was going to have to do something she absolutely dreaded: ask Gideon for help. Returning to town, Liliana was somewhat surprised to see that Gideon hadn't abandoned her like the rest of the Gatewatch. She was surprised further when, upon laying out her plan to unmake Josu, Gideon agreed to help without a second thought, even if it meant having to find a different method of taking out Belzenlok. But in order for Liliana to unmake her brother, Josu would need to be lured back to Vess Manor, the site where he was created. Only there could the ritual be reversed. So, Gideon and Liliana rallied nearby forces from New Benalia, soldiers who had recently been defeated by Josu and the Cabal, leaving groups of wounded survivors scattered throughout the area. They met with the Angel Rael, leader of these forces, and worked with her to gather her troops, using Vess Manor as a staging ground. To lead Josu out into the open, Gideon and the Benalish soldiers would need to distract and scatter the Cabal's forces. Along with the undead knights from before, the Cabal had a number of different combatants to worry about. Living knights called Gremnants made up a large portion of the Cabal's army, along with clerics that could wield dementia magic, dark magic that harnessed its victims' deepest, darkest fears. Skin witches would be amongst the group, monstrous creatures that stripped and wore the still-living flesh of their victims. Leading the way was a Dreadshade, a sinister undead specter with the terrifying power to grow to enormous sizes, or shrink down small enough that it could enter a corpse and control it like a puppet. Pretty spooky stuff, all in all. So, the plan would be to distract the Dreadshade and scatter the forces it led, forcing Josu to show himself. While Liliana waited at the manor, a Talarian mage cast an illusion spell to make Gideon look like a skin witch, to allow him to approach the Cabal's army unabated. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before Gideon was affected by the dementia magic, seeing visions of his friends from Theros, the ones he had gotten killed long ago. This momentary distraction caused Gideon's disguise to falter, but by that point, he had gotten close enough to the Dreadshade. He speared the monster through the chest and ran, enraging the Shade enough to ignore its orders and give chase. With the shade out of the way, Rael and the Banalish forces attacked the confused Gremlins and Clerics, exactly as planned. Liliana could hear the fighting in the distance when she felt something approaching, a strong necromantic power, fueled by dementia magic and a cold rage. Through the rage, Liliana felt familiar fragments of memory, her brother's essence locked away under layers of Belzenlok's death magic. Liliana called out to Josu, prompting a response of disbelief and rage. The Lich made his way to Liliana and moved out from the shadows, but Liliana could barely recognize Josu, so changed by what Belzenlok had done to him. Or rather, what she had done to him. Liliana barely had time to defend herself before Josu charged. She retreated into the manor, luring her brother to the ritual site and drawing power into the chain veil. She hesitated only for a moment, briefly seeing Josu not as the undead monster he was, but as the young man whose life she had destroyed. Liliana shook off Josu's dementia magic and blasted him with the full force of the chain veil. As Josu's body fell apart, Liliana realized that the power holding the manor together too had been blasted away by the chain veil, aging the structure to a crumbled ruin. Liliana assured the fading remnants of Josu that he could rest in peace now that the curse of Ves had finally been broken. But to Liliana's shock, Josu responded, rebuking this, fiercely stating that the curse could never be broken as long as she still lived. She had utterly destroyed the Ves family. To Liliana's horror, Josu recounted that he never properly died after what she did to him, that he had been suffering as a living corpse all these centuries. Their father tried to lay him to rest, but Josu killed him. Their mother searched for a cure and was killed in the process. Sisters, cousins, they all tried to stop Josu, and they all had died. Liliana was the true curse of Ves. With those bitter final words, Josu was gone, leaving Liliana staggering, but with a hardened resolve. If she was to be a curse, she would be Belzenlok's. With the Cabal defeated in Caligo, the Banalish forces escorted Gideon and a physically and emotionally drained Liliana to the city of New Benalia, where they were supposed to meet with the Planeswalker Ajani. The pair waited for him atop one of the Banalish garrison's signal towers, because they were specifically asked to meet him high in the air for some reason. Well, that reason quickly became apparent. Liliana and Gideon were not met by a sole Planeswalker, but by the legendary skyship Weatherlight. After Yawgmoth's Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria several centuries prior, the Weatherlight had been completely destroyed while defending the plane. It had done its job well, as a key component of the legacy weapon which blasted Yawgmoth out of existence, but with its purpose fulfilled, the Weatherlight wasn't long for this world. The ship fell from the sky and sank to the bottom of the sea off the coast of Reborn. It laid there ever since, decomposing around the ship's Thran metal skeleton. And although the Phyrexians were no longer a threat to Dominaria, for now, the plane was now facing a new crisis, the ever-growing shadow of the Cabal. And so, one woman hatched a plan to combat this threat, and restore the Weatherlight to do so. That woman was Jaya, a former student of the original Talarian Academy, who, thanks to some of Urza's time shenanigans, was effectively unaging. Jaya had helped create the skyship Weatherlight, and even commanded it during its first voyage, and she knew the ship would be essential in purging the Cabal from Dominaria. With the help of some merfolk, Talarian scholars, and a score of builders and artisans, Jaya located the Weatherlight's desiccated frame deep beneath the ocean waves, and had it raised back to the surface. Once the Thran metal supports were cleaned off, Jaya would introduce to the Weatherlight a new seed, like the one the ship's original hull had been grown from, supplied this time by the elemental Molimo. And thankfully, the most important piece of the Weatherlight was still intact, the Power Stone that fueled the mighty vessel's engine. While the stone was unfortunately inert, it was brought back to life by Tiana, an angel who had been sent by the Church of Serra to watch over the Weatherlight's reconstruction. Although Tiana had originally been created for the purpose of watching over an entirely different machine, one which was destroyed by the Cabal before she could even arrive to protect it, Tiana seemed to have an innate connection with the Weatherlight and its Power Stone. It made sense, given that the Power Stone contained the collapsed remnants of Serra's realm, an artificial plane created by the ancient planeswalker Serra as a haven for her angels. Tiana almost felt like Serra herself was providing her with the knowledge she needed to understand the Weatherlight's inner workings. And so she was tasked by Jaya to directly oversee and lead the efforts to rebuild the Weatherlight. While Tiana worked on reconstruction, Jaya worked on gathering a new crew. While she was basically the same woman she had been centuries prior, most of the Weatherlight's original crew were dead and gone. So, where to start looking? Well, the only natural solution for brand recognition was to recruit the descendants of the original crew. First was Shauna, descendant of Sisay, the Weatherlight's original captain, a seasoned warrior who had inherited her ancestors' immunity to magic. Shauna considered it an honor to follow in Sisay's footsteps. Second, Joyra asked Danitha Capuchin, distant relative of Gerard Capuchin, once commander of the Weatherlight, to join her, but she was flatly rejected. Danitha refused to leave her home unprotected while it was being threatened by the Cabal. However, her younger brother Raph was more than eager to join Joyra's crew. A young but energetic mage, Raph lacked experience, but with a little convincing, Joyra agreed to take him aboard. Joyra, Shauna, and Raph returned to find the Weatherlight fully restored to its former glory. Although no longer capable of traveling between planes, the ship was every bit as brilliant as it had once been. Before embarking, Joyra recruited 2 new crew members. Tiana agreed to come aboard as the ship's chief engineer, while Arvid, a former knight of Dominaria who had been cursed with vampirism, joined as chief of security. And although she didn't know it yet, Joyra already had a 5th crew member in the form of Slimefoot, a thallid, or fungus person, who had stowed away as a sprout attached to Molomo's seed. Slimefoot spent weeks growing in the Weatherlight's hull, and once discovered, was kept around as a janitor and sort of general mascot. I mean, how could you not keep this little guy around? I mean, look at it! What a cutie. Anyway, with her crew assembled, Joyra was joined by Ajani Goldmane, and the Weatherlight set sail to meet his associates in Dominaria, which is where we pick back up, with Gideon and Liliana. Ajani asked the pair where the rest of the Gatewatch was, which left Gideon to awkwardly explain their massive screw-up on Amonkhet. Ajani was devastated, believing that without Jace, Nissa, and Chandra, there was no hope of defeating Bolas. And considering he had specifically advised the Gatewatch not to go to Amonkhet, and they completely ignored him, he had every right to be upset. While Gideon explained their plan to defeat Belzenlok and free Liliana from her contract, Ajani insisted that they shouldn't bother and should instead work to gather more Planeswalker allies for the inevitable showdown with Bolas. But Liliana held firm that she wouldn't be able to fight while constrained by her pact, and Gideon stood by her. At a stalemate, Ajani grimly wished them well and planeswalked away. Fortunately for the 2 Planeswalkers, Joyra and the Weatherlight crew were still more than willing to help. After all, their primary goal was to defeat the Cabal, and killing Belzenlok was as good a way as any to do that. So, they needed a plan. Without Chandra's firepower or Nissa's brute strength, they weren't going to be able to just storm their way into the Cabal's stronghold. Instead, they were going to need information. Joyra had learned over the years that the Stronghold was constantly changing and being rebuilt, so what they needed was a high-level Cabal agent to tell them exactly the best way into the Stronghold, the traps that surrounded it, etc. But where to procure such an agent? It wasn't much to go on, but Raph had heard rumors of the Cabal infiltrating his old school, the Academy at Talaria West. If they were lucky, perhaps the Academy had captured an agent they could interrogate. They weren't lucky. Upon arriving at Talaria, the group was met by Joda, Archmage of the Academy and immortal ex-lover of Joyra's, and Nabon, the Academy's dean. Although the Academy hadn't captured any members of the Cabal, the Weatherlight had arrived at a good time. 9 Academy members had just been discovered murdered. Liliana interrogated one of the corpses, only to find its memory was clouded by dementia magic. That confirmed a Cabal agent did this, but unfortunately it meant that none of the victims actually saw the culprit. Shauna pointed out that it was very unlike Cabal agents to murder indiscriminately like this. While the Cabal's fighters and gremnants were crazed berserkers, its agents tended to be stealthy and innocuous. Perhaps this big display was merely meant to be a distraction. After putting together those pieces, the group realized that the laboratory the bodies had been brought to, which connected to several important archives, was normally inaccessible to students. However, a number of students had been allowed in to assist in bringing the corpses there for examination. The Cabal agent must have committed the murders only to pose as a student volunteering to be a corpse carrier, specifically to gain access to the archives. A bit convoluted, but whatever. So, what was the agent after? Well, there were a number of ancient artifacts housed within the Academy, any number of which would make prime targets for the Cabal. You see, Belzenlok had a pretty huge ego. So huge, he was making an effort to rewrite Dominaria's history, with himself at the center of everything, and he was accruing artifacts and titles to lend his claims validity. Belzenlok, Lord of the Wastes. Belzenlok, Doom of Fools. Belzenlok, Lord High Artificer. Belzenlok, forger of the Black Blade. Belzenlok, you get the picture. Well, upon investigating the archives, the group found a particular artificer's device missing, and a student lurking in the shadows. That student, of course, was no student at all, but rather a disguised Cabal agent. After a brief fight, the agent was subdued and paralyzed by Joda, to be taken away for interrogation. Raph uncovered a lot of information via a spell that allowed him to pull specific thoughts and memories out of someone's brain. But one thing in particular caught Gideon's attention. The Cabal was in possession of something called the Black Blade. The Black Blade was an ancient sword, forged and wielded by the planeswalker Dakin Blackblade. A fierce weapon, the Black Blade had the capability of consuming the souls of those it slew. In fact, Dakin had once used it to slay and absorb the Elder Dragon Piru. Gideon realized that if the sword was able to kill an Elder Dragon, it could easily kill a demon, and just maybe another Elder Dragon too. The group decided that they needed to obtain this weapon, but as it was stolen away by Belzenlok, they would need to infiltrate the depths of the Cabal's stronghold to do so. They knew their way around the stronghold thanks to their captured agent, but they still needed a way inside. And for that, Jaya had the perfect person in mind. Teferi Akosa was a powerful mage and a master of temporal manipulation. If he so desired, he could freeze, speed up, or slow down time around a given area, allowing easy entry to the stronghold. Once upon a time, Teferi was a powerful planeswalker, powerful enough to phase the entirety of his homeland of Zhalfir out of existence to protect it during the Phyrexian invasion. However, after he sacrificed his planeswalker Spark to seal a temporal rift over the continent of Shiv, Teferi was left powerless to restore Zhalfir. He became villainized throughout Dominaria, being seen as a betrayer and the destroyer of Zhalfir. After the mending, he laid low, marrying a woman named Subira and having a daughter with her, Nyambi. He was still immortal thanks to the same time shenanigans that affected Jaya, so he'd had a lot of time to reflect on his past. He never stopped regretting his actions, and he worked tirelessly to try to find a way to bring Zhalfir back. Well, in the present day, Subira was dead, and Nyambi was about as old as Teferi looked. She had been helping her father locate artifacts left behind by Urza that Teferi believed could help restore Zhalfir. One such artifact, the Starfield Orb, was locked away in a monument of Urza's construction, filled to the brim with traps and puzzles. While Teferi and Nyambi had made it to the heart of the structure, they had met a dead end trying to reach the artifact itself. While heading back to camp after an excursion one day, Teferi saw the Weatherlight overhead and it landed to meet him, his past catching up to him once more. After some discussion, Teferi wasn't able to be convinced to help fight the Cabal. After all, he needed to retrieve the artifact that Urza had hidden from him. Nyambi had a mathematical solution to the final puzzle, but it didn't seem to work, and Teferi wouldn't leave until they could figure it out. Nyambi consulted with Jaya, who believed that she did indeed have the right answer, but there must have been some other factor at play. Urza would never have played fair after all. So, Teferi and Nyambi headed back to Urza's monument to try to crack the code once more, with some additional help this time. In the monument, the group discovered that Urza had indeed cheated. Unseen to anyone but Liliana, several spirits lingered in the corners of the puzzle chamber, the spacing and number of which affected the solution to the puzzle. With Liliana and Nyambi's help cracking the altered code, Teferi was at last able to open the door that concealed his prize. With the Starfield Orb in tow, Urza's monument began collapsing and the group hurried to escape. After narrowly making it onto the deck of the Weatherlight as the plateau around them sank into the earth, Teferi agreed to join the Weatherlight's crew on their quest. So, we have Jaya, Teferi, Gideon, Liliana, and the rest of the Weatherlight crew heading to Urborg to slay Belzenlok. Here, let's depart a little bit to talk about somebody who's been missing in action for most of this story, Chandra Nalar. Following Nissa's dramatic exit, Chandra had planeswalked to Regatha, to the monastery Carol Keep, where she had received training in her younger days. Chandra wanted nothing more than to become stronger, and lucky for her, she had noticed on Dominaria the faint ether trail of another planeswalking pyromancer. Perhaps, she thought, that planeswalker was Jaya Ballard, Chandra's idol and founder of Carol Keep. Jaya hadn't been seen for decades, and everyone at Carol Keep thought her to be dead, but Chandra was convinced that it had been her that she had felt on Dominaria. With luck, maybe she could convince Jaya to help train her. Chandra returned to Carol Keep not to train, but to retrieve the goggles of Jaya Ballard, an artifact sacred to the Keep's monks. She thought that by presenting the goggles to Jaya, she could prove that she was a worthy pyromancer from Carol Keep and convince her for training. Unfortunately, as she went to take the goggles, she was confronted by her former mentor, Mother Luti, who questioned what was going on and why Chandra needed the goggles. As Chandra agitatedly tried to explain herself in that frantic way that Chandra does best, Luti tried to convince her that she didn't need Jaya, and that she should focus on helping her friends if they were in so much danger. At this, Chandra exploded, telling Luti that she didn't know what Chandra needed, and she should stop giving advice she wasn't asked for. With that, Chandra left for Dominaria to find Jaya. The Planeswalker's trail led Chandra to the city of New Argive, where she learned that a powerful pyromancer was said to be helping a group of soldiers defend the city from the Dragon Prosh and his kobold minions in the forested hills nearby. After traveling for days, Chandra was starting to lose hope, until she came across several dead soldiers and a score of kobolds lying in wait to ambush the approaching Argivians. Well, Chandra managed to break the ambush and save the remaining soldiers from slaughter, and when she asked Baird, the leader of the soldiers, if they had been traveling with Jaya Ballard, she finally got the confirmation she was looking for. Jaya was alive, and close by. Heading south to the Yavimaya forest where Baird said Jaya was headed, Chandra eventually came upon a peculiar scene. A newly dug crater of an excavation site under siege by tree elementals. The crater was being defended by huge excavation automatons, and as the titans clashed, Chandra momentarily didn't know whose side to take. Her confusion was quickly abated by the one overseeing the excavation, the Silver Golem Planeswalker, Karn. He told Chandra that his dig site was under attack by animated trees sent by the elemental Multani. As it turns out, Karn was digging for the Golgothian Silex, the artifact once used by Urza to destroy his brother Mishra and his Phyrexian army. Multani, once destroyed during the Temporal Rift crisis, was rebuilding his body through sheer rage at someone trying to reclaim the Silex, an object which had caused such devastation to Dominaria. Karn wanted the Silex so he could use it to destroy New Phyrexia, once known as Mirrodin, once known as Argentum, a plane of metal created by Karn himself that had long since been corrupted and consumed by the Phyrexians. If Multani knew that Karn's goal was to obliterate New Phyrexia, he surely would have let him dig, but in his newly formed, semi-conscious state, he couldn't be reasoned with. Anyway, Chandra helped Karn defeat the attacking elemental, just as someone new showed up. It was Mother Luti, aka Jaya Ballard. Chandra was flabbergasted, naturally. She didn't only already know Jaya, but Jaya had been her mentor since she was a teenager. It turns out, Jaya had gone to Regatha centuries ago and drunkenly performed some remarkably impressive pyromancy. 200 years later, sometime after the Mending, she returned only to discover that they had started a religion around her. Well, Jaya didn't want to be a religious icon, but she had to make sure they weren't misrepresenting her. So she joined Carol Keep as Mother Luti to guide new generations of pyromancers. With that mostly satisfactory explanation, Chandra requested Jaya teach her to become a better pyromancer. She was immediately rebuffed with an absolutely not. After all, Jaya had been trying to mentor Chandra for years, only to be frequently ignored. As Mother Luti, Chandra dismissed her as a useless old woman, but now that she was the legendary Jaya Ballard, suddenly she was worth listening to. Chandra was out of second chances. The following day, Chandra had a chat with Karn before trying once more to get through to Jaya. Just as their conversation began, however, they heard a loud thunk from within the crater. The automatons had reached the Silex, and all of Yavimaya responded. New waves of tree elementals appeared from the forest, followed by Multani himself. Or at least what was left of the aggravated, reforming elemental. As Karn squared up to fight his old friend, Multani and the forest around him froze, their flow of time grinding to a halt. With absolutely impeccable timing, the Weatherlight had shown up to save the day, and Teferi was keeping Multani in place to allow Chandra, Jaya, and Karn to escape. But Chandra wasn't ready to leave yet, to leave Multani suffering and unaware. Carefully approaching the frozen elemental, Chandra called upon everything Nissa had taught her, and effectively guided Multani through calming meditation. Believe it or not, it worked, and Multani began to change, calming and awakening, his new body shrinking and relaxing. Once released by Teferi, Multani was assuaged by Karn that he meant to use the Silex on New Phyrexia, never intending Dominaria to suffer its cataclysmic effects again. Multani was a little annoyed when he noticed that the Weatherlight had been rebuilt using the seed of Molimo, his rival, rather than one of his own, but regardless, he was placated, thanks to Chandra. Her display was so impressive, in fact, that it showed Jaya that perhaps Chandra still had some potential after all, and so she agreed to provide her with the training she sought. Anyway, Karn, Teferi, and Jaya were all united again, centuries-old friends who hadn't seen one another in decades. Before the three could catch up, Jaya had a request to make of her friends, for after they defeated the Cabal. Help the Gatewatch kill Nicol Bolas. Of course, that would be difficult for Teferi, seeing as he was no longer a planeswalker, but Jaya had something for him. She had used a powerful machine called the Thran Mana Rig, a device which was instrumental in the creation of Power Stones and Thran Metal to comb the land of Shiv, recovering Teferi's sacrificed spark and instilling it within a small Power Stone. After holding on to it for so many years, Jaya wanted to return it to her oldest friend. Teferi wasn't convinced right away, however, and said he would have to think about it. Being a planeswalker versus not being a planeswalker seems like a pretty easy decision to me, but what do I know? I'm not Teferi. So, Gideon and Liliana spent some time catching Chandra up on their plan to kill Belzenlok, when all of a sudden, Jace planeswalked onto the Weatherlight, having escaped from Ixalan. He basically took a look around, warned everyone that Bolas was preparing a trap for planeswalkers, saw that his friends were still working with Liliana, warned them that they absolutely should not be working with Liliana, and then dipped once they both denied him. And honestly, there seems to be a bit of narrative disconnect between this scene as shown in the Dominaria story and as shown in the Rivals of Ixalan story. For one, in Rivals, Jace followed Gideon's bright ether trail to find him on Dominaria, while in the Dominaria story, he says that he followed the Weatherlight, which itself leaves a trail like a planeswalker. But ignoring that small detail, it's like the writer of the Dominaria story didn't get the memo of Jace's revelations and personality overhaul throughout the Ixalan storyline. While in Rivals of Ixalan, Jace is bubbly, excited that he managed to planeswalk onto a flying ship, and overjoyed to see Gideon, in the Dominaria story, he's back to his usual broody self, barely paying heed to those around him, and honestly, just back to being a bit of a jerk. It's really jarring after seeing his personal journey in Ixalan, and overall kinda disappointing to see his character take such a drastic step back. After that tornado of a planeswalker blew through, Teferi was reconsidering Jaya's proposal. He had actually fought Nicol Bolas before and lost, so he knew just how dangerous he was. He also realized that denying the power his spark could give him to help restore Zhalfir would be incredibly selfish. And so, Teferi accepted his spark, reigniting and becoming a planeswalker once more. Eventually, the Weatherlight and its motley crew arrived in Urborg, where the Cabal's stronghold was located. They landed on the outskirts of a small city to meet with some members of the resistance against the Cabal. From them, they asked for two things. One, the clothing of a Cabal member, and two, information on where some of the last great battles of Urborg were fought. The former for purposes of disguise, of course, and the latter to provide Liliana with an ample supply of corpses for her disposal. Slimefoot the Thallid helped out too, actually, by communicating with the spirits of the land and informing them of their quest to destroy Belzenlok and the Cabal. What a helpful little fella. The following day, they were ready to put their plan in action. Chandra, disguised as a member of the Cabal, would bring Gideon, posing as a prisoner for the fighting pits, into the Stronghold. While guarded by Karn, Teferi would use his magic to create a fast-time bubble around the two, allowing them to move into the Stronghold in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Liliana would send a horde of zombies to attack from the outside, creating a distraction that would allow them to search for the Blackblade. Well, Chandra and Gideon infiltrated the Stronghold without too much difficulty, but became stuck when Teferi's spell ran out, but the planned distraction didn't come. Unfortunately for all involved, the Weatherlight was delayed by an attacking monster. Your soul he will gargle. He is very largle. He won't let you go fargle. It's Frog Spirit Yargle. Yargle was once an overambitious servant of Belzenlok named Yarkul, who was turned into a maggot by the demon for his insolence. When that maggot was eaten by a frog, Yargle grew and burst forth from its body. Yargle was a ravenously hungry spirit, and right now, he had his sights set on the Weatherlight. Well, Liliana couldn't sick her zombie army at the Stronghold with the monster attacking, so she turned her attention to Yargle. But even with her zombies, Jaya's fire, Jaya's machines, and the rest of the Weatherlight crew working in tandem to defend against Yargle's assault, nothing seemed to be able to hinder the hangry frog. But fortunately for them, as Yargle grabbed hold of the Weatherlight and began trying to eat it, Slimefoot was busy communicating with the spirits it had talked to earlier. Although they couldn't help directly, they could call someone who could. And so, just as the Weatherlight was about to be destroyed once more, a massive rotted being rose from the land, a twisted elemental made of mud, vines, and fragmented corpses, glowing with a sickly green hue. It was Muldrotha, an elemental born of an offshoot of Yavimaya that Multani had transported to her Borg during the Time Rift crisis that had been corrupted by the land that gave her life. Fortunately for the Weatherlight crew, Muldrotha wasn't after them, but instead focused her rage on Yargle, prying him off the Weatherlight and dragging him down into the muddy swamp. Now free from the Frog Spirit's grasp, the Weatherlight continued to make its way to the Cabal Stronghold. Back at the Stronghold, things weren't going so well. In order not to arouse suspicion in the absence of Liliana's distraction, Gideon let himself be ushered into the Cabal's fighting pits, where he was forced to fight for his life against gremnins and dementia magic-riddled prisoners. In the pits, he fought alongside a half-elven woman named Radha, a grand warlord who had once aided Teferi in closing time rifts during the crisis, and had even sacrificed her own unignited planeswalker spark while doing so. Well anyway, Chandra struggled to find a vantage point to help as Gideon, Radha, and a small band of survivors fought against the waves of pit fighters, when all of a sudden, alarm bells sounded. The Stronghold was under attack. Liliana's distraction had come. In the chaos as Cabal gremnins and clerics streamed towards the Stronghold's entrance, Chandra searched for a way to free Gideon from the pit. While she struggled to figure out how to do so without arousing suspicion, she noticed one of the head clerics, a woman named Whisper, had begun casting a spell into the pit. The spell spread a dark mist that killed any who touched it, executing the rest of the prisoners and pit fighters before they could escape. Frantic to halt the spell, Chandra launched a fireball at Whisper, and the idea of being stealthy went right out the window. Whisper dodged the first fireball and sicked a nearby group of gremnins at Chandra, most of whom Chandra quickly immolated. Thanks to Jaya's training, Chandra was able to hit her targets much more precisely and with deadlier firepower than ever. With the gremnins cleared out, Chandra activated the mechanism that unleashed the stairs down into the pit, but unfortunately she didn't notice Whisper sneaking up on her, casting her death spell. Thankfully, Gideon was able to exit the pit in time to shield Chandra with his magic, giving Radha a chance to stab Whisper right through the back of the head. While the rest of the pit survivors headed outside to aid in fighting the Cabal and causing general mayhem, Radha decided to follow Gideon and Chandra further into the Stronghold in search of the Blackblade. They found the treasury fairly quickly, thanks to the information Raph had extracted from the captured agent. But alas, there were a number of doors, all sealed with heavy chains, and a slew of dark spells and— oh, never mind, Chandra just blasted completely through them with fire. That was easy. While those three retrieved the Blackblade, the crew of the Weatherlight were busy maintaining their offensive. They had picked up Karn and Teferi and were making steady progress when they were beset upon by a dark specter. That specter was Urgaros, a spirit created from dark magic, who attacked mounted on the back of a flying nightmare. Despite being undead, Urgaros couldn't be controlled by Liliana, and she couldn't keep up the assault on the Cabal with it attacking. So, while the rest of the crew fought the specter off, Liliana jumped ship to find and help Gideon and Chandra. Really, she just wanted to be there to watch Belzenlok die, but hey, whatever works. After being lifted to the ground by her Borg spirits, Liliana discovered Gideon locked in combat with Belzenlok just outside the Stronghold gates, as Chandra and Radha held off his gremnins. Approaching, Liliana drew Belzenlok's attention with a blast of death magic, but she was too weak to do any real damage while focusing her strength on her zombie army. But while Liliana couldn't do any physical damage, she sure as hell could do emotional damage, and so she began taunting Belzenlok, trying to keep his attention off Gideon. Alas, while Belzenlok at least wasn't hitting Gideon, Gideon wasn't hitting him, and every strike with the Blackblade was dodged or blocked. Finally, after Liliana's barbs infuriated Belzenlok enough, Gideon went in for the killing blow. Belzenlok was faster, turning at the last moment to slam Gideon to the ground. But the Blackblade didn't fall with him, instead catching in the flesh of Belzenlok's thigh. As Belzenlok moved to finish Gideon off, Liliana leapt towards the sword, grabbing its hilt and activating its dark, soul-draining magic. Belzenlok was immobilized and helpless as the Blackblade drained his life, using Liliana's body as a conduit to do so. But after a moment, the deed was done, and Belzenlok was nothing more than a pile of flesh on the pavement. Much like after she had killed Kothafed, Liliana was surprised and disappointed to see that the contract had not faded from her skin. But no matter. All 4 of her demons were dead. Liliana was free. With all said and done, it was time for the Gatewatch to leave Dominaria. Jaya, Karn, and Teferi were all invited to join the Gatewatch, but while Karn and Jaya refused, Teferi accepted. Karn planned to leave to deal with New Phyrexia after dealing with Bolos, and Jaya said she simply wasn't a joiner. But Teferi wanted to see to it that the multiverse would be protected, the way he could not protect Zalfir. For the lost and forgotten, he would keep watch. As the crew of the Weatherlight said their goodbyes and the skyship disappeared into the clouds, the 6 planeswalkers were ready to head to Ravnica to meet Jace in order to begin preparations for Bolos. One by one, the planeswalkers left the plane, but as Liliana tried to follow them, she found herself unable. She was briefly terrified. Had she lost her spark? Had it been the Blackblade? Too many uses of the Chainveil? As a huge dark figure coalesced in front of her, Liliana realized. Unbeknownst to her, with all 4 of her demon debt holders dead, her contract defaulted to its broker, Bolos himself, and he had come to claim his prize. By killing her demons, Liliana was playing into Bolos' hands all along, and she was now enslaved to the Elder Dragon. Although she considered disobeying him, Bolos informed her that should she dare, her pact would kill her, aging her hundreds of years in a moment, dooming her to disintegrate into nothingness. With no way out, bound like a prisoner to the fate she had sought so long to cheat, Liliana followed Bolos away from Dominaria. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a like, comment, share, and ring that notification bell to get notified when I post. I have been posting more frequently, believe it or not. Also, a huge thanks again to Wizards of the Coast, and a reminder to please click that link down in the description. So, this was my longest Magic lore video yet, and also one of my longest gaps between episodes. Part of that was just me figuring out how to maneuver the Ambassador program and, getting all that figured out over the past several months. But it's also due to just, how much story Dominaria has. Dominaria marked the shift from the 2-set block model to the 3-and-1 model, which had 3 standalone sets and 1 core set each year. So Dominaria was initially designed to be 2 sets, but it had to be condensed down to 1, and I think that's really reflected in, just how many different events happen throughout the story and the rapid pace of them. Anyway, the next couple of videos will be pretty interesting because the next 2 sets, Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance, take place more or less concurrently as detailed in the novel The Gathering Storm. I'm very excited to tackle it though. With all that being said, thanks again for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.